Alexander Vindman did the right thing and exactly what he was trained to do in reporting his concerns about the president's phone call. And if you're waiting to hear a similar sentiment from Republican lawmakers, you probably shouldn't. So far, there's been barely a peep. A few, though, have said it was inappropriate. But as a whole, the party is ignoring Democrats' calls for an investigation. Speaker Nancy Pelosi criticized the president and attorney general, calling their involvement in the Stone case an abuse of power.
The president this week demonstrate once again that he has no respect for the rule of law. Barr has deeply damaged the rule of law by withdrawing the DOJ sentencing recommendation, the act of interference, and Trump's retribution against lead attorney in the Stone case. The attorney general has stooped to such levels. He's lied to Congress, for which he will be in contempt. He has engaged in these activities. What a sad disappointment.
Next month, Bill Barr will appear before the House Judiciary Committee and expect Democrats to ask him to explain his relationship with the president and why it seems he's doing Donald Trump's political bidding. Both Barr, though, and Trump have denied coordination in Roger Stone's case. But when asked by reporters, the president did not rule out pardoning Stone. And then he oddly claimed that nobody knows why Stone, who was convicted of lying to Congress and intimidating a witness, both federal crimes, was in legal trouble in the first place.
A man leaks classified information, highly classified. They give him 2 months. Roger Stone for doing, nobody even knows what he did. In fact, they said he intimidated somebody. That person said he had no idea he was going to jail for that. That person didn't want to press charges. They put him in for 9 years. It's a disgrace. Are you considering a pardon? I don't want to say that yet, but I tell you what, people were hurt viciously and badly by these corrupt people. And I want to thank, if you look at what happened, I want to thank the Justice Department for seeing this horrible thing. And I didn't speak to him, by the way, just so you understand.
Joining me, Washington Post White House Bureau Chief Phil Rucker. He's the co-author of the book, A Very Stable Genius. Also with me, New York Times White House correspondent Annie Carney. Phil, I want to read a paragraph from an article you wrote about this, because I feel like it's a paragraph you could have cut and pasted many times in the past 3.5 years of this administration. You write, some of Trump's top aides have counseled him against speaking out on legal matters, warning him that doing so could wrongly influence proceedings because officials at the Justice Department or elsewhere would then know they needed to please him or risk his wrath. Trump has often responded, I have a right to say whatever I want. It just sounds like you could have been saying that for a whole host of things throughout this past 3.5 years.
Yeah, Katie, and that's why, you know, even though the president denies that he interfered in the Stone case by, you know, picking up the phone and calling the attorney general, he made his views very clear. He went on Twitter to complain about the recommended prison sentence, and it's not as if the attorney general doesn't know how to read Twitter. The political appointees at the Justice Department are well aware that Roger Stone is a friend of the president's, a longtime former advisor of the president's, and they knew what the president would want in this case. And the people that we interviewed for that story yesterday pointed out that the president is increasingly comfortable testing the bounds of the rule of law, using his power in this way, in part because the Republican Party on Capitol Hill has been so compliant and unwilling to challenge him.
Well, let's play some Republican lawmakers reacting to this news.
I'd rather not there be political interference in such cases, but I'd rather look at the details before I answer hypotheticals.
The president has now ruled out a pardon for Roger Stone. Do you think that would be a good idea if we went that route?
I think there's a reason why he's not made a decision. I assume that he's not contemplating it seriously at this point. So.
He might be. I mean, he didn't rule it out, and he's already been convicted on 7 counts.
But he didn't rule it in, so.
The president also has not ruled out a pardon for Roger Stone. Would that be a good idea?
Well, he hadn't said he would do it, so we'll wait until that happens, if that happens.
So that's on a pardon for Roger Stone. I'd rather not he do that. I don't think he's contemplating it seriously, and let's wait to see if that happens when it happens. There's not an expectation out there, though, Annie, is there, that if it does happen, that these Republican lawmakers would take any sort of action?
That would be a big break from how they've conducted themselves up until this point. And I'd say all those comments about it potentially happening are just kicking the can down the road, kind of not wanting to comment on it because following Trump's lead, and Trump is not being very clear on what he wants to do, probably because he's in a re-election campaign, and he would rather put that off till after votes are finished being cast.
Let me ask you about John Kelly real fast, because John Kelly is the former chief of staff. He's come out and he said that this is, excuse me, unacceptable. Let me just read the president's response. We had John Kelly's response in the open. Here's what the president has said. When I terminated John Kelly, which I couldn't do fast enough, he knew full well that he was in way over his head. Being chief of staff just wasn't for him. He came in with a bang, went out with a whimper, but like so many exes, I can't say it, exes, I guess, he missed the action and just can't keep his mouth shut. I thought exes was blocked out on my paper because he said something wrong. Exes or something I couldn't say on television. Andy Carney, John Kelly, I mean, listen, it's not like the president's behavior really changed while John Kelly was his chief of staff, but in some senses he was somebody who it was believed was trying to institute some order, was trying to pull him back from his worst instincts.
That was the John Kelly at the beginning when he came in, but that he quickly showed that he wasn't really able to do that, and he did hate the job and made it very clear, was by the end of his tenure was leaving early and stomping out the door saying, I'm leaving and I'm never coming back. We all reported that like last year or whenever he left at this point. I just find the timing of his coming out and speaking interesting. Let's remember he does this at a paid speaking event. He does this after impeachment is over. Why is he
goal,
kind of
right?
Speaking publicly now? What's the goal? Like when and is it, you know, when he's already, you know, been acquitted, and now John Kelly has terrible things to say about him. The president's response is kind of like clockwork. This is what we could have expected. This is how he reacts when former aides speak out against him. But I think more curious and what is the timing of John Kelly deciding to do this.
It's almost like he's on a rehabilitation tour in search for another job or in search for his next paycheck. I don't know that. That's
something like that. It's sort of like, what happens if all of these people come out and speak out against the president, you know, in November after the election, if he's reelected? Like, what's the goal? What's the purpose of that at that point?
Phil Rucker, just briefly, are any aides or anyone out there saying we're not quite sure what Donald Trump could do next?
Sure. You know, they don't know what he could do next. And actually, very few aides are trying to do what Kelly tried to do in those early months of his tenure as chief of staff, which is to rein in the president. Rather, they're letting the president do as he pleases. It's very much a presidency of one at this point, with the staff working for him, our advisors trying to execute his orders and do what he wants done. And in this case, it was to change that prison sentence recommendation for Roger Stone.
Phil Rucker, Annie Carney, guys, thank you so much. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Joining me now, former Trump campaign advisor Sam Nunberg. Sam, good to have you here. You are somebody who knows Roger Stone really well. You know the president's relationship with Roger Stone really well. Are you
long
surprised?
And complicated. 40 years, bond, introduced through Roy Cohn. Roger was very friendly with Fred Trump as well. They have had a relationship that is rocky. But one of the reasons I think that the Justice Department here was going to make Roger a sacrificial lamb, as opposed to the way they're treating Flynn, is because, you know, this is the way the president typically acts with people that are close to him. And as you would know with your reporting, he says very bad things about them. But then when push comes to shove, there is a sense of loyalty and a sense of friendship there.
Are you surprised that it's happening now? I mean, from what you know, because I know you still talk to folks in that world, I know you're still pretty plugged in. Do you know if the president was being restrained or constrained in the way he might have wanted to speak out publicly against Stone in the past? And then what changed?
The president was being advised by certain members of the White House counsel team, by certain members at DOJ, that what Roger did was worse and deserved a harsher penalty. For instance, when you show John Cornyn, I'm not surprised that John Cornyn says he would hope that Roger is not pardoned. I mean, Roger does not have a lot of friends. His most influential friends, frankly, biggest advocates through this have been like Tucker Carlson, Judge Napolitano on Fox News. And what happened at the end of this is, and by the way, I do say that Barr and Timothy Shea, they're lying. They knew about that original sentencing memo, and they haven't denied it either. So what happened was that they left to their own worst devices, in my opinion, these career civil servants, left to their own worst devices, they give a 7 to 9 year sentence that would be higher than 99.9% of all sentences. And it was astronomical at the same time while they're trying to delay the Flynn sentence. And I would also say, though, too, the president hasn't fired any of these people, too. He removes them. He pushes them out.
Why, though, would the president feel more free to go out and say, I'm not going to mention how I feel about a pardon, I'm not going to rule it out, or feel more free to tweet about Roger Stone's sentence today? Was the impeachment trial and being acquitted for it something that removed any remaining boundary that he still had around him?
I don't think so. Had the sentencing memo come out during the impeachment trial, I think the reaction would have been the same, especially when it was during his own defense attorneys giving their own arguments in support of him and knowing that he was going to be acquitted. What I think is that once a sentencing memo like this, now you have to also remember there is the other political consideration. People would advise the president, well, don't pardon Roger, until after the election. However, this is a great talking point for anyone that is going to be running against the president, saying you're a very close advocate, very close friend of yours was sentenced for 7 to 9 years on obstruction. Let's be very clear. This is a victimless crime.
I understand what you're saying, but that, I mean, if you don't like the sentencing guidelines, then pass a federal law that uniforms sentencing guidelines. I mean, it's up to the prosecutors, and then the judge makes the decision.
But once again, I would say that nobody at the Justice Department is being honest about this, including Bill Barr. They should have left that sentencing memo in if they wanted to enter.
Why is he going after Amy Berman Jackson? She's not the one that would decide whether or not Paul Manafort goes into solitary confinement.
Well, there he's misinformed, but he's misinformed. I don't know why he says that. I think that that's something he hears in the media, but I think that she was conflicted. I think that when they asked her, because she worked on the Manafort case. The Manafort case was clearly connected to the Stone case. He asked for her to recuse herself. In the Manafort sentencing, she said something along the lines, almost directly communicating to the president that this is not an exoneration of any Russian influence. I would take that as if that she should, from the appearance of impartiality, we have plenty of judges.
I mean, you're asking somebody, a judge, to recuse themselves for the appearance of something when this administration is nothing but the appearance of everything.
But they're supposedly independent as well, right? It's the Article 3 branch are supposedly, they act.
But wasn't she just stating fact? It wasn't an exoneration. I mean,
she was, but that also came before the president had said that. But look, it's. I think he's attacking her too. She's an Obama appointee. This is what goes on in the conservative ecosphere.
But is it right to say that the president feels that his Justice Department is something that he should be in control of? That it's his Justice Department, that it's his government. He should be the one that makes the rules that come out of Congress. He should be the one that decides what happens, who gets investigated, how they get investigated, who gets sentenced, how they get sentenced in his Justice Department. Does he feel like the federal government, the government as a whole, is a lever for him to pull and push as he pleases?
I think in terms of investigations that are tied to him and tied to this original, in certain criminal cases and investigations that are closely tied to him, then yes, I think he does. Now, they also do work for him under the executive branch as well. They have been given independence before, but I think that things have changed now, certainly after the Mueller investigation.
Federal government works for the American people. Sam Nunberg, always good to have you on. Thank you very much. Breaking news from Capitol Hill. The Senate just passed a resolution reining in the president's ability to declare war on Iran. Joining me now is NBC News congressional reporter Leanne Caldwell. So, Leanne, I don't know the breakdown yet, but 8 Republican senators joined Democrats to pass this resolution.
Yeah, Katie, the news is that they passed this legislation, and they did it in a bipartisan way. So what does this do? It's a war powers resolution that puts guardrails around the president's ability to declare war. The reason this came up, and it's regarding Iran specifically, is because after the killing of Soleimani in early January and tensions were really high with Iran, a group of Republican and Democratic senators got together to ensure that the president doesn't engage in further military action against Iran without congressional approval. So Republicans, there were 8 Republicans who joined all Democrats to support this. They say that this is not a rebuke of the president. It's not trying to tell the president anything. It's just trying to assert congressional power and the issue of making war, really. But it's still extremely significant, Katie, that 8 Republicans decided to join this resolution when these days on Capitol Hill, so few Republicans are willing to cross the president. And also this is the second time that they have done this regarding war powers. Today it's Iran. Last year they did the same thing regarding Yemen. They tried to constrain the president and that country's tensions as well. The president, though, he says he's going to veto it, and he actually will, but it still sends a strong message to the president, Democrats say, Katie.
Yes, not a veto-proof majority, 55-45. And just for everyone's edification, Tim Kaine introduced this, and it requires there to be a debate and a vote in Congress for any escalation of hostilities with Iran, and only Iran, not a broad war powers resolution. Leanne Caldwell. Leanne, thank you very much for joining us. And Nevada's powerful culinary union has its chef's knives out for Bernie Sanders. In a flyer distributed to its 60,000 members, union leadership said Bernie's Medicare for All plan would end culinary health care. After vocal backlash from Sanders supporters, many of whom argued the statement was misleading at best, the union said it had been, quote, viciously attacked online. The union is scheduled to hold a press conference at 1 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon. Sanders' opponents were quick to join the fight. Joe Biden expressed his support for organized labor. Pete Buttigieg touted his own health care plan as an alternative to single payer. And Elizabeth Warren, who, like Bernie, supports Medicare for All, came to the union leadership's defense. Sanders, who was endorsed by Nevada's largest teachers union last month, is viewed as one of the most friendly, labor-friendly candidates in the race. In a union-heavy state like Nevada, it does raise the question, if not Bernie, then who then? Who then? Joining me now, president of the Association of Flight Attendants, Sarah Nelson, and national affairs correspondent for The Nation, John Nichols. John, I want to start broadly with you. In this race, Bernie Sanders is, as we just said, seen as one of the most friendly of the candidates towards the labor unions. But this is a race full of people, full of candidates who are trying to uphold workers' rights. It's a friendly race for the unions in general. Talk to me about this specific fight and what it means more broadly.
Sure. All of these candidates are essentially pro-labor, all the major candidates. And in fact, some of them have very strong pro-labor records. Senator Sanders has been endorsed by a couple of unions, including National Nurses United and the Postal Workers. Joe Biden has some significant union endorsements from firefighters, IBEW, which is electrical workers, and others. So, I mean, you see labor support distributed around. But in some states, like Nevada, there are unions that really do have a tremendous amount of influence. And in the case of the culinary workers, they are a highly influential union. They have organized in Las Vegas, but around the state. And the fact is, being anywhere but on good terms with them is a tough place to be going into a Nevada caucus.
Do the members of that particular union generally vote in line with the leaders of that union, though, John?
One of the things that's really important to understand is that in every union, you have people who will follow the union line and you have people who won't. But the culinary workers have been very effective and very they've remained very in close touch with their members. And so when they communicate with their members, I think it does have an influence. So what's said today at the press conference is a big deal. And frankly, how these relations go back and forth matters a lot. One thing I'll note is that today Senator Sanders tweeted support for the culinary workers in an effort they're doing in some healthcare negotiations they're involved with. So I think there may be some attempt at some bridge repair there.
Some acknowledgement that he's going to need them going into Nevada next week. Sarah, when it comes to union support, what I've heard from folks is that on Sanders and on Warren, their Medicare for All plans are just they're going to kill them. It's not going to kill their candidacy, I should say. It's not going to help them to try and take away what many see as great packages for health care that union members are not going to want to get rid of in favor of Medicare for All when they don't necessarily know what Medicare for All would look like.
Well, I think that that's a really flawed talking point because there are union members who have good health care plans, union members who don't. I know that every time we go to the table, it's with the plans where we do have good health care plans, it's about diminishing those plans and taking away things that we bargained before and paying for them again now. So everyone understands across the board, across this country, and this is a national discussion, that for-profit health care doesn't work, and where unions are united is on that, and we are also united on the fact that health care for all is the way to go. Now, the culinary workers are certainly raising the issue that they have gained incredible political power in Nevada and been able to put together a healthcare infrastructure that works for their members, and they want to make sure that that's protected. And I think it's important to note that both Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders have said that that's exactly what they want to do, is make sure that everyone who has what they have today is protected, but that we're raising the floor so that we can actually raise the roof for the whole country and make sure that everyone is covered with health care.
So, Sarah, why has your union not endorsed a candidate?
Our union, much like many of the national unions, has not endorsed and left that to the locals. It's important that what we're doing is turning out the vote. One thing that I would say is that all 5 top candidates have labor plans that are better than anything that we have today. Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders have plans that exceed that. For example, the right to secondary strikes, which is important in industries, in every industry today, where contract work is taking away from union jobs. And we have to have the ability to have these secondary strikes so that we can hold employers accountable. So those labor plans are the strongest. But every single candidate, with the exception of Mike Bloomberg, who doesn't mention unions one time in his plans and has a really poor record on unions, every single other candidate has plans that are better than anything that we have today. And certainly when you compare them with Donald Trump, they're far and above over what we have today. So we're going to be fighting for the Democratic nominee because that nominee is going to be the one who champions labor the best.
Sarah, let me ask you this, because you did go after Pete Buttigieg on what he said. He said Medicare, for those who want it, is a better option for unions. You called it offensive and dangerous and a gross myth. Let me ask you what you say to union members, your union members, who might ask, I'm not sure about a government-run health care program. I'm not sure that the quality of care is going to be as good as what I have now. I might not like my health insurance plan now. I might not think it's fair. I might worry about it, but at least I know the quality of care that I am getting.
What our members know is that when we have been to the table for the last 10, 15 years, our health care has been diminished. We've had to fight like hell to hang on to what we had before. Costs are going up. The burden of those costs are being transferred to workers, and the system is eroding. Not only that, but you can have the best plan in this health care system, and you can have a system that's crumbling. We have hospitals that are closing because the private equity firms are buying up hospitals and closing them. And so we cannot have a for-profit system. That's not working. And our members understand that, but they do want to talk about policy that is going to maintain the plans that they have today, the coverage that they have today, I should say, and make sure that they still have access to good health care. And that is a discussion that we need to have, but it's very hard to have in the middle of a presidential race where the talking points are really about, are you going to take on the insurance companies or not?
Sarah Nelson. Sarah, thank you very much for joining us. And John Nichols, thank you as well. As Michael Bloomberg rises in the polls, so does his profile. The former Republican-turned-independent mayor of New York is now facing the increased scrutiny that comes with being taken seriously as a presidential contender. And that now includes his record and his past comments on race and economics. On Monday, an audio recording where Bloomberg claimed you could Xerox the description of young male minorities and pass it out to all the cops surfaced. And last night, so did a video. This one was from 2008 about the financial crisis.
It all started back when there was a lot of pressure on banks to make loans to everyone. Redlining, if you remember, was the term where banks took whole neighborhoods and said, people in these neighborhoods are poor, they're not going to be able to pay off their mortgages, tell them your salesmen don't go into those areas. And then Congress got involved, as local elected officials as well, and said, oh, that's not fair, these people should be able to get credit.
Redlining is a discriminatory practice that denies loans to people living in poorer areas. But getting rid of that did not cause the crisis. The crisis was caused by big banks using predatory lending practices and offering consumers across the spectrum loans they could not possibly pay back. The comments are only complicating Bloomberg's effort to make amends for stop and frisk, a racist practice that boomed during his 3 terms as mayor. Joining me now, one of the lead plaintiffs in the stop and frisk case, David Auerlicht, and senior writer for TheRoot.com, Michael Harriet. Michael, I'm going to start with you on the new audio that came out talking about redlining. What do you make of it?
Well, first I'd like to point out that redlining didn't exclude poor people. It was specifically for poor people. It excluded non-white people. The Homeowners Loan Corporation specifically had rules that excluded black people and people of color from obtaining guaranteed loans. So it was actually for poor people, which is contrary to what Michael Bloomberg believes. But it seems that he doesn't know how banks work either, because he thinks they have salesmen that go around selling mortgages. But this is indicative of Mike Bloomberg's obstinate denial of the racist policies that he put in place, and somehow he blamed black people for them. He blames black people for the violence and to shore up his stop and frisk program, and he does it again with the financial crisis. And this worries me because these weren't like radio interviews or television interviews. It shows what Michael Bloomberg will say and preach when he's behind closed doors with people of power. And that's concerning to me and to black voters around the country.
David, there was a lawsuit deeming stop and frisk unconstitutional back in 2013. That's when stop and frisk started to, the numbers started to go down. You were one of the lead plaintiffs on that case. You started getting stopped when you were 15 years old. Tell me what that was like.
It's hard to describe the interactions with police from 15 till my 30s. It's hurtful. It's damaging. It's more than just an inconvenience, like the mayor said back in 2014 or 2013 when this case was going on. It affects me emotionally, mentally, and so does millions of New Yorkers and Americans throughout this country that have to deal with these type of interactions.
Did you do anything wrong?
No, I didn't do anything wrong. I wasn't a criminal then. I'm not a criminal now. I'm an attorney. I'm a public defender. No, the idea that 95% of the people that commit crimes in this country, in the city, are black and brown is racist. It's it's the same type of rhetoric that Donald Trump uses when he says that all Mexicans are rapists and murderers. And the fact of the matter is, that's racist, and the comments that Mike Bloomberg made were racist too. It's not true. That he actually got the numbers wrong. I believe over 95% of the people that were stopped under stop, question, and frisk, there was no gun recovered. I believe in the 90% there was no contraband recovered, not even marijuana. So the idea that this guy would believe these things and say these things are deeply offensive and as far as I'm concerned, disqualifying for a Democratic presidential nominee.
What neighborhood were you in when this happened?
I grew up in the East Village. It happened to me there. The cases that I testified to in the Floyd versus City of New York, that happened in Queens, in Jamaica, Queens, when I was attending St. John's University in that area, and one of them was in Harlem. So it's a neighborhood, it's a citywide, I would say a countrywide problem. But
what would you want to hear from Michael Bloomberg? Is there a way for him to make amends for this?
I think that half-hearted apology that he gave a couple months ago there needs to be a lot more to be done, especially when this isn't, I don't know if a statement or two can make up for the harm that his policies have done towards people of color in the city. But more than just a half-hearted apology would be needed. Like, speak to these people. He has no idea what it's like to be manhandled, thrown up against the wall, to have everything taken out of your pockets, to be disrespected. how about you speak to people and try to connect with people onto the things that he's done and believe. I mean, clearly, Michael Bloomberg needs a history lesson, at least, I would say.
Michael Harriot, what about you? Would you want to hear something specific to make amends for it? Is it possible?
I don't know if there's anything that he could say now that would make up for it. Not only make up for it, but make people believe that it's sincere, right? Because he's had 2013, he was out of office, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18, he said nothing. In 2019, he said nothing. This year is the first time he made any kind of apology, and it was half-hearted, and it was because he was running for president. So I don't know if you can take that with any merit, because another thing is we've seen what he's done. Why would we believe his words? And he has the resources to change and lobby and stop this practice, even though he's not mayor anymore, yet he's done nothing.
I believe he apologized for it late last year, late 2019. That was the first time. David Auerlicht, I believe so. We're going to check on that. Michael Harriot, gentlemen, thank you very much. We appreciate it. And let's bring in now former Philadelphia mayor and Bloomberg campaign surrogate, Michael Nutter. Mr. Mayor, I know you've endorsed Michael Bloomberg. I just wanted to respond to both Michael and David.
Well, I think the first thing I would say is anyone who either has been or feel that they have been abused by any police officer, hassled, mistreated, as I said, abused, whether in New York or Philadelphia or anywhere else, that is the worst of circumstances. It is a devastating circumstance. It has a mental, personal, spiritual effect on someone, and that is not in any way, shape, or form appropriate policing, and none of us should ever tolerate that. With regard to you made mention of another tape. What I heard was Mike Bloomberg explaining what redlining or predatory lending subprime mortgages were. He has never blamed people who found themselves victims of many of the banks to have anything to do with the crisis. It has been well documented.
Well, he said, let me just read what he said.
Many banks have been charged with violations of
Mr. Mayor, let me read exactly what he said. It all started back when there was a lot of pressure on banks to make loans to everyone. Redlining, if you remember, was the term where banks took whole neighborhoods and said, people in these neighborhoods are poor. They're not going to be able to pay off their mortgages. Tell your salesmen don't go into those areas. And then Congress got involved, local elected officials as well, and said, oh, that's not fair. These people should be able to get credit. Am I misreading that?
No, you're reading whatever it is that you're. I don't know. I haven't seen what you're reading. I think what I heard, what I'm hearing you say. That was the verbatim
from the audio.
I understand that. What I'm hearing you say is Mike Bloomberg describing what other people have said. The fact of the matter is, and it has been well documented, that any number of banks in the United States of America did pressure people or allow people to sign documents for mortgages that they're clearly financially would not be able to maintain. The economic crisis hits, and then those individuals are victims of the banks for doing things that were inappropriate, and they've been fined for that. On the other hand, Mike Bloomberg created a program in New York City, I know this for a fact, because it was modeled after Philadelphia's, to prevent people from losing their homes through mortgage foreclosure. Mike Bloomberg is the person who helped to build up housing opportunities in New York City. And so I think it is a misreading or a misunderstanding of Mike describing what others have said, but his actions in New York City are the exact opposite. This is a narrative that's going on here that is just inappropriate and wrong.
Mr. Mayor, let me ask you one other question when it comes to stop and frisk. It is a policy that ran through his 3 terms here. There was a lawsuit that deemed the practice.
I don't mean to cut across you. It was a policy and practice in New York City before Mike Bloomberg became mayor of the city of Philadelphia. So I want to be sure that people know that.
It spiked, though. The numbers dramatically rose, when Mayor Bloomberg was the mayor here. And they started to lessen. They started to go down only after a court deemed it was unconstitutional in practice here. And then the mayor appealed it. He never apologized for it, In fact, he defended it for quite a long time. and he only started apologizing for it, and we checked this, in November of 2019, after he declared he was running for president. Does that not sound disingenuous to you?
I know the person, I know his heart, and I know that he was sincere, and he actually did apologize before
why did he apologize? Maybe it was right before he was running for president. I'm sorry if I got that timeline a little off.
Yeah, that's all right.
Why not
But you asked me a
apologize
question.
2 years ago?
You asked me a question. Let me at least try to answer the question. He apologized when he apologized. The issue is, and if you're going to talk about stop and frisk, then I think it's also fair to and responsible to talk about the fact that there were over 600 homicides a year in New York City when Mike Bloomberg became the mayor of New York. That New York City was already using stop and frisk, which is constitutionally allowed. And yes, the stops did go up, and also crime did go down. When Mike left office, there were 48% fewer homicides in the city of New York, 9,200 fewer homicides during his 12 years in office, but also a 39% reduction in the prison population. So at the same time that crime is going down,
hold on, the vast majority of stop and frisk, but I just want to make it clear, the vast majority of stop and frisk, somewhere around 80-90% of people who were stopped were innocent, and they weren't doing anything. Here's the numbers. 88% were innocent. 88% were innocent. 685,724 were stopped. Are you saying that even though 88% of the people that were stopped were innocent, even though that is what's responsible for homicides going down?
No, what I'm saying to you, Katie, is that's a part of the reason why Mike has apologized. He admits that he did not fully see the damage that was being committed by the aggressive nature of the officers, while at the same time crime was going down in New York City, which was his responsibility. He has made a mistake. The question is, after you realize that you've made a mistake, after you have been out of office, after you've had some time to reflect, what are you trying to do going forward? And that requires also, I say fairly, look at the Greenwood Initiative. Look at what Mike has said with regard to African Americans specifically, about wealth building, about 100,000 new black businesses with employees, about 1 million new black homeowners in the United States of America. These are also plans and proposals, many of which are comparable to what he did when he was mayor of New York, that no one else is talking about. None of us have ever been able to fix the past. What you can do is try to do something for the future. There was a 42% increase in high school graduation during his time. There was a 43% increase in teacher salaries during his time. The Young Men's Initiative that was solely focused on black and Latino men to help them get jobs, to help upgrade their skills, which was the program that President Obama used as a model to create My Brother's Keeper. And so we have to look at the totality of someone's record in evaluating where they are, what they've done. You cannot fix the past, but you can do something about the future. You have to atone for the past, and certainly Mike has tried to do that and will have to continue to do so. But he's also running for president of the United States of America. He's not running for mayor of New York. And lastly, Katie, by the way, for all the talk about stop and frisk in New York City, that is still the pattern and practice of the New York City Police Department. Mike's been out of office for 6 years now.
You're 100%.
That is still the policy and practice of the New York City Police Department.
I'm not saying anyone here is defending that policy or practice.
I'm not here to defend it either. All I'm saying is it's still going on.
I've let you go on now for quite some time, and I appreciate your response.
And I appreciate that.
One more question to you. You talk about violent crime, and I think you're attributing the decrease in violent crime to his mayoralty specifically, or maybe this practice. But violent crime has been on the decline for many years. I'm looking at a Pew stat right now. FBI numbers, violent crime has fallen 51% between 1993 and 2018. I mean, it's been on the decline.
But Katie, I mean, I've actually, with every respect to you, I was mayor of Philadelphia for 8 years. I can assure you that if you were reading stats that said that crime went up in New York City, there would be only one person to blame, and that would be the mayor. So you can't have it both ways. He actually took steps and initiatives to lower crime. Stop and frisk was not the only one. Everyone should certainly know that. It goes to the credit of the New York City Police Department. It goes to the credit of getting people jobs. It goes to the credit of all the other fine public servants, whether in New York or in Philadelphia. In my particular case, a 32% reduction in homicides during my 8 years. So, you know, you can't have it both ways.
Well,
if crime went up during that time, let me finish, Katie. If crime went up during that time, I can assure you that you or someone else would be blaming Mike Bloomberg. So if it goes down, you get the credit that goes with it.
Let me ask you this question. What do you say to people like David Arlicht, who was, as he said, thrown against a wall, patted down, had all of his stuff taken out of his pockets when he was innocent, when he didn't do anything wrong, he was just walking down the street? What do you say to people? Hold on, let me ask my question. What do you say to people like him? I'm not finished.
Okay.
What do you say to people like him who see Michael Bloomberg running for president and feel like he has not adequately addressed the practice, has not adequately addressed his feelings? We had that audio come out where he was talking about Xeroxing a description of a black or brown person and distributing that to the cops and saying, this is who you stop, this is who commits crime. What do you say to them when Mayor Michael Bloomberg is now running for president, to be president of everybody in this country, and maybe they feel like his apology right before he announced wasn't actually sincere? He's not sat down for a lot of interviews on this subject on national broadcasts. I welcome him to do it here. I hope he does.
Okay.
What do you say to them?
Okay, so you asked me about 4 questions, and I'm going to try to get through them all.
That's one question.
The first, today, 2, 3, 4. I mean, there was a lot packed in there. I'm going to try to address them all. First and foremost, to David, you know, I've been stopped by the police before and not even had his level of experience. It is a horrifying experience. I mean, I would apologize to him for how that occurred and how he felt. And, you know, I am hopeful, certainly as we move forward, that Mike will have more opportunities, whether on your show or someone else's show, to more personally address that particular situation. But I certainly understand how David feels, and I certainly feel bad about that. When people see someone else now going for a higher office, I mean, again, Mike Bloomberg cannot do anything about in 2020, the things that happened between 2002 and January of 2014. You cannot change the past, but you can try to make amends. You can try to do things for the future. And yes, he is running for a different office, and the power and the responsibility and the authority to even use more of the federal government's resources to address many of the issues that you're talking about. And so the question is, how do you move forward? I think that he was sincere. I respect and appreciate if other people don't think so, and that will be a difference of opinion. You can always make a more sincere apology. You can always make for other efforts to atone for your actions. But you can only do that if you're allowed to try to move forward and talk about the things that you want to do, the lessons that you've learned. And I think Mike has learned a lot through this process, had some time for reflection. And lastly, I guess I would say, and maybe, again, because he's not a talker and rather is a doer and doesn't brag about the kinds of things that he's done since he's been out of office, whether it's the great efforts on his own philanthropy or from Bloomberg Philanthropies, he has put people to work in his company. I was just at a meeting where folks were talking about teenagers, 15, 16, 17, who are now Bloomberg terminal technicians. They will get jobs. They will be able to move on with their lives. He hasn't really talked about those kinds of things either. And so all is not for naught here. It's not everything is bad and nothing else has happened. You're talking about one of the most successful business people in the world.
I think people are questioning, they're questioning a record that he had when he was mayor. They're questioning a portion of his record that he had.
Let's look at the whole record, Katie.
No. We as journalists are allowed to question whatever portions of the record we want.
But you're going to do your thing. I get that.
To try and bring light to what was going on and where that person stands now, especially if they're running for president of the United States. It's what we do to Donald Trump every single day. and it's what we're going to do to every single one of the candidates in the race.
Right.
This is a record.
I have no problem with that.
This is a record that stopped, as we just said, over 600,000 people. 88,000 of those were innocent. It is one that there are folks out there who believe he should answer questions about directly to a journalist or directly to those who were affected, not just on a stage and with a podium, but actually have to answer answer questions on it. And then you can bring, he can bring up every other thing that he believes he's accomplished, and whether or not he feels that mitigates that, and whether or not people out there feel that mitigates that. That's for them to decide. We're the ones here asking questions. Former Philadelphia mayor.
All I would ask you to do is do a fair examination of the whole record. Don't cherry pick.
Former Philadelphia Mayor Michael Nutter. Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, Katie.
Still ahead, after 50 years of hurdles, we may finally be about to get a brand new constitutional amendment. Stay with us. Today, the House of Representatives cleared a hurdle to make the Equal Rights Amendment the 28th Amendment to the Constitution. The House voted to remove a deadline for states to ratify the amendment, which would guarantee women the same legal rights as men. Congress first sent the amendment to the states in 1972 and ultimately gave them 10 years to ratify it. It was quickly ratified by 35 states, but stopped short of the required 38 needed to make it a part of the Constitution. No other state joined for 40 years until Nevada took it up in 2017. Illinois ratified the ERA in 2018. And Virginia did it last month. That means the required 3/4 of states have ratified it, but now we are decades past the congressional deadline. So further complicating the matters, 5 states have since rescinded their initial ratification. So the resolution to remove the deadline now moves to the Senate. Joining me now is human rights attorney Kate Kelly. Kate, thanks for coming back on. We appreciate it. So Virginia has now ratified it. The House has now said we're going to take away this deadline. Where does it stand?
So yeah, exciting. You celebrate every victory that you can get, and today in the House, they voted to remove the deadline, and now, of course, it will go to the Senate, where many things are in sort of a holding pattern. But it does need to be voted on by both the House and the Senate in order to get rid of that original deadline that you mentioned. You know, Congress put in that deadline, so Congress can also remove it.
When I was doing my research on this, or when I was listening to how the House argued for and against it, Republican lawmakers were saying that if you ratify this, if you allow the ERA to become a constitutional amendment, then it would be basically allowing abortion to be written into the Constitution. It sounded like they were saying that if you give equal rights to women, then you're going to allow them to do what they want with their own bodies.
Well, yeah, what a parade of horribles that would be. But, you know, we already have the constitutional right to access abortion care, and that has already been decided in 1973 in Roe versus Wade. So we actually didn't need the Equal Rights Amendment in order for us to get access to health care and autonomy over our own bodies.
And what about Ruth Bader Ginsburg? Today she said that ERA proponents should start over because a number of states had rescinded. She said there's too much controversy around it, and she hopes that ERA can start over to get basically, it sounded like, to get a clean bill of health. So there's no controversy surrounding it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the baseline, most important thing to remember is that Ruth Bader Ginsburg is saying we need an Equal Rights Amendment, and it does need to be part of the Constitution, and she's been very consistent about that since the 1970s. Some people favor a start-over approach. Other people say, you know, we've got the 3 states. That's what's required by Article 5 of the Constitution, and it should be put in. You know, I have a podcast about the Equal Rights Amendment. It's called Ordinary Equality, and the reason I called it that is that Alice Paul, who wrote the Equal Rights Amendment, said there's nothing complicated about ordinary equality.
Kate Kelly getting in a podcast plug as well. Kate Kelly, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Keep us updated, and we will be right back.